Heaven Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with special guest and author, Michael Murray. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, before we get started, I believe you're a veteran, so thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you very much. Sometimes I'm almost embarrassed when people thank me for my service because I had such a good time. I had so much fun.
I have an uncle that feels the same way.
I mean, I thanked them, and there was some terrible times, but all in all, I really, really enjoyed my service in the Navy, especially the reserve time. I did 4 years of active duty and then spent 22 years in the reserves. And I went into the reserves because it paid me while I was going to school and I needed the money. And after that, I kept saying, well, I'll quit doing it when it's not fun anymore. And 22 years later, I retired. So
my sister did the same thing. She did 4 years in the Marines, and she's still a reserve. She's been out, let's see, 4 years, 2001 to 2006, 5. Yeah, I can't do math in my head. From 2005 until now, she's still in the reserve. So she does it because it's what she wants to do, and it's fun. It's extra money while she does school or whatever else she's doing.
Sure. It was let's say, while I was in the reserves, let's see, they sent me to Spain. They sent me to Scotland. They sent me to England. They sent me to Puerto Rico twice. They sent me to Hawaii for about 3 weeks. So yeah, it was a tough job, but somebody had to do it. So yeah.
And I bet the stories that you have from 22 years plus made it way into your book.
Oh yes. Well, the book itself was, when I got out of college, I was graduated at 10 o'clock in the morning, and at 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was in the Navy. And I started off and went to a school in Athens, Georgia. And 6 months later, they sent me to Guam. And so I was in Guam, and I had a job that I really liked, really enjoyed, and I agreed to extend for another year to stay in that job, and went home on leave for a month and came back. And when I got back, my boss walked in and said, "You're getting orders to another command." And I went, "What?" I said, and so I called up the detailers and tried to, keep it calm.
Yeah.
And I asked him, "What the blank, 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 blank are you all doing?" And they said, "Well, you wanted to stay on Guam, didn't you?" I said, "No, I wanted to stay in this job." They said, "Well, we need somebody over there, and you're going." And I said, "I know nothing about what they do." And I said, "So basically," I said, "I have the right rank and I can feed myself." And he said, "Yeah, that's pretty much it." But that was a squadron. I went over to a squadron, which is a group of ships, and I was working for their boss. And those ships were still involved in Vietnam. But they had been moved from Cam Ranh Bay, which was a big Navy base, down to the Vung Tau area, and they were having trouble getting supplied. So I went in for a week to see if I could help with the supply problems that they were having there. And so this book is mostly based on what occurred during that week. Much of it is true, is based on things that actually occurred. Some of it is based on things that I heard, stories that I heard. But I really am a storyteller, much more than a novelist. And so this book is sort of a series of stories that are linked together, mostly by the fact that I just happened to be there and in that job. And it had to be the most bizarre week of my entire life. Had to be.
Well, you know what? It may have been a bizarre week, but it made a great story.
There are wonderful stories in here. And interestingly, I've read a lot books about Vietnam, and including Carnot's Vietnam and David Halberstam's Best and the Brightest, but all of them are based on combat. And only 15% of the military people that were sent to Vietnam were engaged in combat. The rest of them were doing other things. And this is a book about
the other things.
What the other 85% of the people were doing. And it's funny, and it's funny only because it's so bizarre. I mean, and I didn't make this stuff up. It's either stuff that I heard or actually lived through. So.
It's like my uncle, he is a Vietnam veteran, or at the tail end of it. He never left the country, US. He was stationed in South Carolina the entire time he was in the Navy. And he has stories that he just overheard, or just, you know, people come back, or they misplaced something that dropped off one of the carriers that still has not been found. You know, stuff like this.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And as I say, it was what I was doing on Guam was in support of what was going on in Vietnam. So, you know, even though I wasn't actually physically there, every day was stuff about Vietnam and what was going on, the bizarre things that were occurring. So it was truly the most bizarre week of my life.
Yeah, you look at it as, we hear about the war itself, the battles and the ones that were there. Everyone talks about that, but there's so much going on behind the curtain. And some of the stuff you just have to, when you get away from it, you stand back and scratch your head and go, no, that really did not just happen.
You've got to feel for it. I mean, it's kind of like when I arrived, I landed in Saigon, and I was assigned to a group of we were all supply officers in the Navy. And so I was assigned to, for administrative purposes, this group of supply officers. And they picked me up and took me over, and I walked into the office, and everybody was wearing Navy khaki uniforms. Nobody was in combat uniforms. Nobody was carrying weapons. We had desks. You could have lifted that office out and put it anywhere in the world, and it would still look exactly the same. But I went from there, Saigon, down to Vung Tau, where the ships were, and I got there, and the week before they had rocketed one of our ships, or possibly the pier, but and this was during what was called the Eastertide Offensive. And during that time, that whole area was under a yellow alert condition, and you've heard these. And in a yellow alert condition, it's enemy in the area, and attack may be imminent. So you had to be on a naval base or a military base from dusk to dawn. And so I flew into the airport, and everybody was jumping off the airplane, running to catch trucks and vehicles. And I stood there waiting for somebody to pick me up, and there was nobody there. And this was 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was going, okay, what do I do now? And I found a telephone, and called. We had a small detachment there, and called and said, where the blankety blank 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 are you guys? I'm at the airport. And the guy I talked to said, you know, Mr. Murray, we're really sorry. Nobody tells us anything. We don't, you know, I'll be right there. I'll be there in just a moment. I said, okay. And so it was sunset. I mean, it was dusk. We were supposed to be on the base at this point. We're driving down the road, and all of a sudden he pulls off the side of the road, and he said, Mr. Murray, do you know how to use these things? And there was an M16 and a shotgun between the seats. And I go, yeah, I've been checked out on small arms. Why? I mean, you know, other than the fact, you know, why do you ask? He said, well, sir, the village we're coming up to belongs to Charlie, which was the name for the Viet Cong. And he said, they've been attacking at sundown, so we might have to fight our way through. And I am here to tell you, there are no words in the English language that will focus your thought process quicker than fight our way through. And the first thing I said is there a road around here? And he said, no, sir, we've got to go through. I said, okay. So I reached over and picked up the M16, made sure it had bullets, and kind of stuck it out the window and said, okay, let's go. And he starts driving along, and I'm going, here I am in Vietnam riding shotgun. I mean, where did this ever? That wasn't on my orders, Anyway, yeah, it was that kind of thing for almost the whole time. And here I was down in the combat zone, and wasn't any fighting going on then, but that's where I was. And a few days later, I flew back to Saigon and ran into a friend of mine from school. He and I had been in the same unit when I was in college. And we ended up going to this absolutely wonderful French restaurant in downtown Saigon, multi-courses. And I'm going, this morning and here I am now in this French restaurant. So it was. Yeah,
it has you in your brain in the same day go from one extreme to another extreme.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And all I can tell you is somebody told me, if you can't laugh, you'll go crazy. And that was it. All I could do was just laugh. I mean, this is too strange. So anyway.
Oh, I love hearing stories like that because it's not just the fighting, it's the how did I do this? And now all of a sudden I'm doing this and it's fun and exciting and it's completely not what we're seeing on the TV.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you one quick story out of the book because it kind of illustrates it. In the office I was working in, I'd gone down to Bungtown and I was back in the office. And there was a hallway down that you went to the bathroom, which we called a head. And there were offices off to the right. And and they all had the frosted glass pane in the door and then some logo painted on it. And so one of them said Navy Psychological Warfare.
Okay.
So I went back and I asked the guys, I said, what do they do? He said, we don't know. We have no idea. We call them pigs and chickens because we know they give pigs and chickens to the villagers, but that's all we know that they do. So I'm sitting at my desk, actually working on the report that I was trying to write. And this guy from Pigs and Chickens walks in. And he walks over to my desk, pulls up a chair and sits down and starts talking to me. Now, all of us are in khaki uniforms. This guy is wearing what we call jungle silks, which are a dark pattern, almost lightning bolt looking gray and black uniform. Not only that, he has a pistol, quick draw, strapped to his hip. Now, none of us have weapons except this guy, and he starts talking. And he was on his second tour back to back in Vietnam, which means he had not gone home. He had been there probably 18 months. And he was in the Navy. And so I'm talking to this guy, and the best I can, he'd be talking on something and then he'd go out on a tangent, and it was kind of like watching two gears without a tooth. He's going and, and then it slips. and I'm talking to him, and as God is my witness, out of one of the big pockets on the front of this squirrel crawled out of his pocket and goes and sits on his shoulder. And he reaches in his other pocket, not missing a beat, still talking to me, and reaches in and grabs a nut and hands it to the squirrel. And the squirrel starts eating this nut. So I'm sitting there talking to a nut who has a squirrel on his shoulder eating a nut. And and I know I had one of those looks on my face like, what? And he goes, and of all the questions that came through my mind, this was not the one that I was asking. He goes, oh, him? He lives in there. I'm going, if you thought about taking a tour back in the States, Hawaii, San Diego, somewhere back in the States, probably. It was bizarre. I mean, it was truly bizarre.
Oh.
And that one, I mean, that's impossible to forget.
Right. And it's funny. I'm sitting here laughing so much I'm in tears because I can actually understand this, having uncles and cousins that were all in Vietnam. And hearing some of these stories that they came up with, no, they can't be like that. No, that couldn't happen. But here, you're not family, and you're telling me something that's just as outrageous as they did.
And that's just, that's just sort of one of them. I mean, it was like, I mean, I could tell you more stories about it, but it was bizarre. One time I went to a book signing of a man that was in his 90s that was in actually fought at Guadalcanal, and walked over when he was signing my book, and I said, do you remember all of this? He said, like it was yesterday. Mm-hmm. And I said, I know. I said, I spent a week in Vietnam, and it is absolutely clear what was going on. Now, as I said, some of the stuff was not things that I actually experienced, but heard enough that I knew them to be true. So, and that was the most important thing to me about writing this book. I want to make sure that any Vietnam that reads it goes, yeah, this is true. This is true. And everyone I've given it to said, yeah, this is true. Mm-hmm. So
you have to keep it accurate enough so you can relate to other veterans.
Oh, yeah.
You have to keep it accurate enough to be accurate, but at the same time, it's a story. So you can put things in there, embellish just enough to make it where you're going through it and just laughing.
Sure. The first night I was there, literally the first night I was there, I hadn't been there 10 hours and was bunking with one of the other officers. And I'm laying in my bed, and in the middle of the night, there was this explosion. Boom! Shattered the windows. And of course, I figured we were under attack. And I looked over at the guy I was bunking with, and he kind of goes up and he shook his head and he turns over and goes back to sleep. Starts going back to sleep. And I'm going, you're going to sleep and we're under attack? And I go, a whole bunch of stuff went through my head, but the one that came out was, don't we need to do anything? He said, no. He said, we know we're going to be attacked if the maids, who are all Vietnamese, don't show up. If they don't show up, it's going to be attacked. Otherwise, we're fine. And in my mind, I'm going, that's the intel? That's the intelligence? The maids showed up, so this isn't an attack? Normally, explosions mean you're under attack.
Ask anyone that's, heard an explosion, you're under attack, or, we need to get paramedics. If you're, not around wartime and you hear explosion, you need to do something. There's something that needs to be call someone up. Well, not just go back to sleep.
And he was right. He went back to sleep. I sort of did, I guess, several hours later. but I mean, it's kind of like explosion. Oh, well, don't worry. The maid showed up, so it's not an attack. I went, what if today they decided to surprise us? They came anyway, and still, anyway.
It's like we're going through this, and now I'm going to all the episodes of MASH that I watched go run up. I'm like, talking to you and now recollecting that TV show, how much is that actually accurate?
it was probably amazingly accurate. That's the thing. I'm sure once the screenwriters got hold of it, they changed it and that kind of stuff. But it's all based on stuff that really was occurring, really going on. But yeah, and it's interesting to me. I wrote it mostly for Vietnam veterans, but I can't tell you how many people, non-veterans, have read it and said, it's great to really realize what was really going on, the kind of bizarre things that were happening there. I have a friend who was in Vietnam about the same time and is reading the book, and we got back to Vung Tau and he started talking. Vung Tau was interesting, and this is probably off the subject, but it was a beautiful city on the coast of Vietnam, and there was this unwritten rule that no combat took place in Vung Tau, and that was where U.S. military went for in-country R&R. Apparently, the Viet Cong were there, North Vietnamese soldiers were there, but it was an unwritten rule. There was no combat ever. So, and he and I got to talking about Vung Tau and laughed until we cried because it was so bizarre. So, anyway.
Yeah, I can see that. You're in the middle of a war. You have this one city that has both sides in the city, and they're cohabitating in the city for R&R.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
you've got it.
In modern day, where would that happen?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was unique to Vietnam or, hold on just a moment. My dogs are telling me that something is occurring, but I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. The only book that I can liken this to that I've read was Catch-22, because that was sort of, it started with the premise to get out of the military on a mental deficiency. You had to apply for it. But if you applied for it, then of course it showed you weren't crazy. So that was the Catch-22. You had to apply to get out for being crazy, but if you were really crazy, you wouldn't have applied. So
right, yeah,
bizarre.
But we have this book out. Are you planning to write any more stories?
Yes, yeah. In fact, I have written a sequel to this book, and it takes the protagonist, whose name is Jeff. He's just gotten out of the Navy. He's back at San Francisco, where most people processed out. He finds he's got about 3 weeks before he's got to be back for a job and start school. He's shipped a 240Z back from Guam. So he decides to use this time to go visit the national parks. And so if you're probably not old enough, but there was a great show back in the 60s called Route 66. And it was 2 guys traveling around that way. And so that's kind of the feeling of that book. But anyway, he goes to Lake Tahoe, and then he goes to Yosemite and Sequoia, and then ends up on the Navajo reservation. And 2 things about that one. Number one is I really wanted to write something accurate about what was going on in the United States in 1973, the bizarre situation that was going on here. Plus, this whole time he's trying to deal with whether or not he really wants to go back. He go back and go to law school and become a lawyer, if that's what he really wants to do with his life. And he's almost personified, I think of the little devil and angel, but he's personified these 2 arguments in his mind. one of the characters he calls the nerd because he's, yes, this is what you need to do and you're on the right path and don't change. And, and the other one is I call the siren, who he adores, but he doesn't trust very much. And they're arguing in his head the whole time he's driving along the highway. So, but anyway, yeah, it was a very fun book to write. And then I've written stories about stuff going on in the Pacific. I was 25 when I left, and I was very senior. I mean, I was the old man. Most of the kids there were 18, 19, 20 years old. And again, on top of it, that was kind of bizarre. But so I've written stories about what we were doing out there during that time. And then I also have a series of stories called the Uncle Billy stories. And they're based on a young man who goes to visit his great Uncle Billy when he needs advice. And his great Uncle Billy doesn't give him advice. He just tells him stories. He said, well, this may not be what would happen to you, but this is what happened to me. And then he tells a great story. So.
Yeah, we all had that one family member, if we're blessed to have those older family members when we're young, that won't teach you a lesson. They won't give you advice, but they'll give you a story that starts up with, I did this when I was younger. This relates to, or, one of those whopper stories, but it has something meaningful in it somewhere.
Yeah, you've got Uncle Billy then down there. And again, I've written Uncle Billy on marriage. And several Uncle Billy on Valentine's Day, Uncle Billy on, I think the toughest thing in the world for a man to do is to buy a girlfriend a gift on Valentine's Day. It's just horrible. So Uncle Billy has a great story about that. So anyway, those are the kind of things I'm writing.
I could actually, I haven't read the stories, but I can just hear some of the tales my grandfather said about, Valentine's Day or marriage or something. And they're so off the wall crazy that you're like, no, Grandpa, you couldn't have done that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway.
Yeah. But this is great, though. You have a lot of fun stories out there. It's not all, the heavy stuff. These are fun. These are quirky. These are sit back and laugh and enjoy yourself, but actually have meaning to them.
Actually, as he said, as Uncle Billy always says, now, I'm not sure this will happen to you, but this is what happened to me in a similar situation. And then Uncle Billy sits, they go outside and they sit under a tree and Uncle Billy smokes his pipe. And everybody, if they never had an Uncle Billy that would do that, they needed one. And anyway, so those are the series of stories I've written. I've actually read several of them, and on my webpage, you can go to the webpage and I'll read Uncle Billy stories, and I love writing Uncle Billy stories. They're fun.
Of course they're fun. I mean, those are the stories you can get into. You have a message, just a message, and then there's a whopper of tale there. It's just fun because these are the type of stories our young people need because we don't have those elders like we did when I was growing up.
I know. I really have noticed that that so many adults now are working, women and men, that there isn't, or retired and traveling, there isn't the mentor, the older mentor that you can come to and say, hey, I really messed this up. What do I do? And he goes, well, if there's a moral to this story, you're going to have to draw it. But here's what happened to me in a similar situation.
Right.
Anyway.
I was very lucky. I had my grandfather and I also had my dad. Between both of them veterans, and both of them, my grandpa lived during the Great Depression, and Dad was a Korean War veteran. So I had stories for any occasion that you could imagine.
I love stories. I love, it's interesting. Publishing books, people don't buy story anthologies anymore. But, if you think about the stories in your life,
Mhm.
If you go back and look at your life, there are a series of stories there, and you remember the stories. And there's times, when you're sitting around having a glass of wine with somebody or whiskey,
Mhm.
and they start telling you the stories of their life, and they're wonderful. I mean, they're wonderful. And in the prologue to my next book called Journey Home, An American Odyssey, I really do say, cherish your stories. Write them down if you forget them. Make
Mhm.
sure you have your stories, because they are so much a part of your life. So I love stories.
And then regardless of what the story is, how you went through it, when you look back years later, you can laugh at it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And you also, the other thing about it is, as you get older and you have your stories and you got through those,
Mhm.
you're facing another one, you suddenly realize, wait a minute, this isn't any worse than that situation. I got through that one fine, and in fact got through it and ended up laughing about it. How
Exactly.
ridiculous it was.
You go from riding shotgun literally through, there. Anything else that happens later on is not going to be as dramatic as that moment.
Absolutely not. I mean, as I said, it was strange. I'd love for you to read the book sometime, and then you and I to get together
This would be fun, because I'm sitting here. I don't know what your stories are, but I have so many family members that had stories, and now it's bringing it back, the memory of them telling these whoppers, and now I'm questioning. I'll say exactly how much is true and how much was,
exactly.
So, but
And
this is what we have to do. It's fun.
Yeah. And as I say, in this book, I would say better than 80% of it is absolutely true as I remember it. And the other 15% were things that I knew that occurred.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of things that I wanted to write about that I never did. Just didn't work in the book, but there were amazing stories that were coming out of Vietnam, and so.
Well, you can always write a short story and have all these short stories in an anthology and just print it as a short stories connecting the two that you've already written.
And I really thought about that. I really thought about doing that. So,
well, as a publisher, I think of little tidbits of doing this all the time. So
yeah. Sometimes I'll tell you, sometime offline, I'll tell you some of these stories because they're mind-boggling.
I would really enjoy that. But okay, we are almost out of time. So where can our listeners and our viewers find you?
All right. I have a website, williammichaelmurray.com. Should be easy to find. And kind of updates. And as I say, I've especially for COVID, I knew a lot of people were home. So I took the time to actually record some of these stories, hoping that people would use this time to just kind of listen to stories. And I tried to do ones that were, ones that were funny or humorous and that kind of thing. So they can find me there. I'm also on Facebook. And luckily I have somebody that is younger and updates those things for me, because other than that, I don't have a clue. But she's very good at, updating and Facebook. So you can find me either place. And if they're interested in the book, they can buy it on Amazon. Here, wait a minute. Now, you may recognize the central character on it because he has a squirrel on his shoulder.
Yeah. If you wouldn't have told that story, it wouldn't make sense. But now that you told the story, the cover makes 100% sense.
the best compliment I got on the cover was woman actually sent me an email saying my cover was tacky. And I went, yes, and so was the war. Yes,
That's
exactly.
awesome.
It was beautiful. I mean, apparently it was to us, it stopped her.
Mhm.
It got her response. And she took the time to send me an email telling me my cover was tacky. And I have no idea whether she thought I would change it based on that, but all I was doing was, yes, a tacky cover for a tacky war. So
That is a good tagline to put on your cover somewhere.
actually, oh, by the way, you can see this. I don't know if you can see it, but this sign right here
Yep.
was actually the sign in the airport in Saigon that you saw, everybody saw when you got there. And but anyway, but it says, if you go into a madhouse and intend to return, take love with you.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. And literally, if you ever have time, call me, whatever, and I'll read you and tell you some more of this stuff. I'd love to.
I'm going to be linking up with you on Facebook and Twitter.
Okay.
So
all right.
we can stay in contact because this has been so fun.
I just, as I say, one of the nice things about it, I'm retired. This is something I've always wanted to do. And I can write a book that I'm proud of. And I really wrote this book so that any Vietnam veteran that picked it up would go, yes, this is true. This is what it was like.
And it gives you something to laugh about. Not
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I get it 100%.
Yeah.
I've never served myself, but my family has. And if they can get around and laugh about something that happened while they were serving, that is a great thing.
If you ever can sneak yourself in, if there are 2 or 3 of them sitting around telling stories, be very quiet and go in and listen, because you'll hear some amazing stuff.
Yes, I know. That's the best time when I was growing up, was sneaking into the room while the adults talked and just sitting there and being completely quiet, because the things that you heard is blankety blank 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 blank. And
Yeah.
there's words in there somewhere.
Yeah. As I say, the guy I was talking to about being in Vietnam was talking about the girls there. Yeah, that's a story for a different time and a different forum. But I was in hysterics. I just,
Very, very true. But thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it very much.
And for all our viewers and our listeners, happy reading.